Okay, hi. Good morning, everyone. It's really a pleasure to be here. I'll be here in 2 weeks as well, giving a pre-Pesach shiur. There's no day that seems more appropriate to dedicate to the Yom Ha'aguna. It's a day, Tanit Esther, where Esther said, Lech knos kol ha'Yehudim. Really an appropriate day to think about those who are waiting for freedom, the hostages, of course, but also women who are waiting for get. And our learning should be for the shichrur, for the release of all those who are currently being held hostage. What I want to talk about today, and it's something I've been thinking about a lot this year as I taught Masechet Megillah in various places, is the rabbinic challenge to create this holiday. Now, I often, when I talk about Hanukkah, there's something brilliant about recognizing we need a light festival in the middle of the winter, and I might have even come here and taught that, maybe not this year, but in the past. The crafting of Hanukkah around Chanukata Mikdash, that at a very intentional time of the year, the idea of the miracle of the candle, which becomes a metaphor for light in the darkness. But Hanukkah is not really Yesh Me'ayin. Hanukkah is Yesh Me'yesh. It has 8 days like Sukkot does. Josephus even says that Hanukkah is a redo of Sukkot because they couldn't celebrate Sukkot that year. There are a lot of familiar elements. That are being built upon in Hanukkah. There's the Midrash about Adam Harishon, who learns how to create fire in the darkness, and about Adam, who also another Midrash about Adam, who instead of Saturnalia and other one. Yeah, thank you. Has a holiday commemorating the cycle of nature where we go from winter to spring. So really, Hanukkah is brilliant, but it's Yesh Me'yesh. Pesach also. I give a shiur, and maybe, I don't remember what I said, I'm teaching in 2 weeks. But how do you maintain a holiday whose entire meaning is around a korban that is no longer being brought? And again, the thoughtfulness, the intentionality, the use of the Greek symposium, which has already been written about by Rav Aviad's father, I believe, his uncle, wrote a Haggadah about the Greek symposium and its integration into Leil HaSeder. But Purim is a different challenge, because Purim is going to be Yesh Me'ayin. And throughout the first chapter of Masechet Megillah, over and over, they have to ask, why are we doing this? Why does this Megillah have any sanctity? Why is this day a holy day? What are the elements of the day that make it holy? And I'll say even more, it's a Mardi Gras day. It's a day that has costumes and has drinking. And perhaps that's the reason we need this holiday. We need a holiday that allows the dressing up and the drinking, but how do we harness it and direct it towards something that is holy, something that is reflective of the spiritual journey we are on, particularly at this time of year. So we're going to be looking at sources from the Bavli, from the Yerushalmi, and hopefully carving together some sort of direction. So if we open up already, everything about Purim is misaligned, is askew. We often feel like we're in somewhat of a parallel universe. Things about Purim do not line up with what we think we know from the Torah, from Rabbinic Judaism. Everything is a little off. And we're going to see that right away in the first Mishnah of Tractate Megillah. Megillah nikret b'achadasar, b'shneim-asar, b'shlosha-asar, b'arba-asar, b'chamisha-asar. We have a holiday in which you can have 5 possible days to read the Megillah. There is nothing else like that. I know Yom Tov Sheni Shel Galiot, we're all from the diaspora. We all know uniformly there is a second day to Chag, kind of as a punishment, one might say, or as a yearning to get back to the land of Israel where time is more authentic, right? But there's no such thing as having a spread of 5 days and 3 different spaces for people from 3 different geographical places, even within the same country, to reading the Megillah. There is nothing else like this. And the fact that the Masechet sets it out almost like, oh yeah, well, no big deal, is going to lead to a challenge in the Gemara. Okay, but let's keep going with the Mishnah. Lo pachot v'lo yoter. Okay, there's a boundary nonetheless. You can't read on the 10th. You can't read on the 16th. You've got 5 days spread. Krachim hamukafim choma miyamot Yehoshua ben Nun korin b'chamisha. So here we have another peculiar element. Walled cities from the days of Yehoshua ben Nun read on the 15th. This already also is going to make the Gemara jump, because what does Yehoshua ben Nun have to do with a holiday that is crafted in Shushan hundreds of years later outside of the land of Israel? Why is Yehoshua ben Nun here? Another thing that is completely mind-boggling. Most of what we do, the thread back to the origin, makes some sense. Historically, geographically, something. Yehoshua ben Nun makes no sense, which already is a rabbinic moment of effort. Something we're trying to do that clearly is meant to shape the holiday, as we're going to see, but is not natural to the holiday in any way whatsoever. We'll come back to that. We then have Kfarim va'ayarot dolot korim b'arba'asar. So we find out villages and large cities that are not walled read on the 14th. Ela sha'kfarim makdimim liyom ha'knisa. And now we have another totally misaligned idea. Like, what is this? The villages preempt their day of reading. They make it earlier based on the day of assembly. Now, what is the Yom HaKnisa? Masechet Megillah is going to get into that later on in the Masechet. The other parts of it's mentioned in Masechet Brachot. It's a takana of Ezra. Ezra, who, by the way, lives after the story of the Megillah takes place, creates a space on Mondays and Thursdays for the Batei Din to sit. It was largely first and foremost around the Batei Din that were sitting every day. You get this in Masechet Ketubot as well. And then it gets condensed to Monday and Thursday to make their work more efficient. And so that the people in the villages who come in on market days, Monday and Thursday are market days, the beginning of the week, not Sunday, but Monday, after you've run out of all your food from Shabbos, no refrigeration, right? You restock on Monday, and then Thursday, close to Shabbos, right? And so also those are the days you're going to have Torah reading. For the people in the villages who might not have anyone who can read Torah during the week. And there's a whole debate. How did they read? Did they read in a continuous loop, like you read on Monday, and then you read the next Aliyah on Thursday? That's what Rabbi Meir says. And then Mincha, interesting, different shitot of what that looked like. But that is the Yom HaKnisa, the day of assembly. Okay. So now I have 3 different potential times for the walled cities, going back to Yehoshua, the unwalled cities, and then the villages. All could be reading on different days. Ketzad. So if the 14th falls on a Monday, ma tov u'ma na'im. Kfarim va'ayarot dolot korim bo bayom. The villages and the unwalled cities read on the 14th. Umukafot choma l'machar. And then the walled cities from Yehoshua read the next day. Chaliyot b'shlishi u'b'revi'i. But what if Purim falls on a Tuesday or a Wednesday, the 14th? Kfarim makdimim liyom ha'knisa. So that's when the villages move it earlier, right? Good, till Monday. And then the large unwalled cities read on the 14th itself. Okay, so now that's a situation where I'm going to have 3 different days in which there are going to be 3 different Megillah readings. Very bizarre. Well, if it's on Thursday again, wonderful. The villages and the unwalled cities read on the same day. They would read on Friday. Chaliyot erev Shabbat. What happens if the 14th is on Friday, like it is this year? Kfarim makdimim liyom ha'knisa. So the villages would be reading today on the 13th. Va'ayarot dolot umukafot korim bo bayom. Sorry, and then the large cities, and then that's what happens in Jerusalem. They have to read on the 14th. That's our one scenario that aligns with this year. What happens if the 14th is on Shabbat? That can never happen, right? We've already fixed the calendar, so the 14th doesn't fall on Shabbat. Chaliyot b'Shabbat, kfarim v'ayarot dolot makdimim b'korim liyom ha'knisa. Even the unwalled cities now have to take it back to Thursday with the villages. Umukafot chama l'machar, and then the walled cities on Sunday. Chaliyot achar Shabbat. Now this is the longest spread. If it falls on Sunday, the 14th, then Kfarim Makdimim Yom HaKnisa, the villages go back to the 11th. Vayarok Delo Karim Bo Bayom Umukafot Choma L'Machar. Okay? Wow. It's confusing, it's dizzying, all of these different variables, different possibilities, and what is going on here? This holiday really is like no other. Okay, let's take a look at the Gemara. Megilla nikret ba'achad asar minalan. So now the Gemara starts off the way it often does. Where is the Mishnah getting this from? What does this mean we're going back to the 11th? Like, what? This is an incredible idea. How can you spread the reading of the Megillah over 5 days, and why? Why are the villages being treated differently? That's another thing we have to consider. Minalan. What are you asking? What a big deal. What kind of question is that? We're going to explain it further on, but I'll give you a little preview, says the Gemara. Chachamim hekelu ala kfarim liot makdimim liyom haknisa kidei sheyisapku mayim umazon la'achim shebakrachim. So this becomes, by the way, I'm going to say this, and many of you are going to nod, oh yeah, we've heard that before. They moved the Megillah reading to the day of assembly so that their brethren can supply them with food and water on actual Purim. If you think that makes sense, don't raise your hand, okay? It doesn't make any sense. Because we start then, one year I'll give a shir on why. I'm now completely puzzled, and I've looked into it a little. I don't have a good answer. So the idea is, so it seems, that the people of the villages shouldn't have to be bothered to come in on a day separate from the day of the assembly. In addition, the people of the villages don't have a high degree of literacy. So they're not going to have anyone who's going to be able to read the Megillah. So Monday and Thursday they can come in and someone can read the Megillah. No one talks about when are they doing their Su'udah Mishloach Mano. We're just focused on the Megillah. But then it turns out they have to come back to provide their brethren with food and water on Tuesday and Wednesday. So why did they read the Megillah on Monday? Right? Like, nothing about this makes sense. Like, I feel, are they service providers? And so for my benefit, me and Gush Etzion, I'm going to make people come in because I can't manage with the food I bought yesterday or the day before? When do we do this? That we have the villagers harnessed. Kidei sheyasapku mayim ba'ochel. What? That doesn't make any sense. And if it's because they don't have literacy, and that makes some sense, then why are they bringing food and water the next day and then not hearing the Megillah with everyone else? Something doesn't make sense. I'm just putting that out there. The Gemara presents it initially and doesn't fully explain it, right? Which is why I said I need to do a deeper dive where this comes from. But the Gemara starts on and says, oh, this is not a big deal. The 11th? Yeah, because they have to be able to bring food to their brethren on Sunday. That's where it makes the most sense. 14th is on Sunday. There's no fresh food on Sunday because the market day is going to be the next day. You've got leftovers from Shabbos. And so that's not good. And so the villagers will read on Thursday so that they can come in on Sunday and serve us. What? What kind of holiday is that for the villagers? Shouldn't they deserve a day off? What?
To serve their neighbors in the village.
No, it's to serve their neighbors, I think, to come back to the towns. Why would they need to serve their neighbors in the village? Why are some people...
The villagers have all the crops and the food, the cows.
Yeah, it's to serve the people in the cities. They're supposed to come back. It says krachim, but why does that make any sense?
Right.
Right. It doesn't make any sense. Right. My reading is okay. So anyway, I don't want to get stuck there. I'm just pointing out again another piece of this puzzle that just doesn't make sense. But that's the end. Oh yeah, remember they have to come in. Anan hachi kamri. Now wait a minute, says the Gemara. Wait. This is really what we're asking. Michti kulo anshe knesset hagodola taknino. So now we've done something very interesting. And by the way, I know you're going to tell me Mordechai was one of the Anshe Knesset Agdola. We're not saying that yet. They basically come and say, the Anshe Knesset Agdola, the men of the Great Assembly, who live from Ezra's time onward, they basically are the ones who are mitake, right? They're the ones who created Purim. So that, first of all, gives a lot of authority. Like it was the Anshe Knesset Agdola, not Mordechai and Esther. We'll get into Mordechai and Esther later in the Gemara. Di'isalka da'atech anshe knesset agdola 14 ו-15 takun atu Rabbanan va'akre takanata de takinu anshe knesset agdola. Wait a minute. If the anshe knesset agdola came up with the 14th and the 15th because of the Megillah, then the Tanaim of the Mishnah had the audacity to override a takana of anshe knesset agdola. Again, it's a classic Talmudic question. We got out the big guns here, guys. Like we're already beginning to get into the thicket of who gets to decide a takana, what a great Beit Din is, which Beit Din gets to go up against another Beit Din. We're in the first Amud of Megillah, and we're already asking some pretty big meta-halachic questions. And so we're going to answer it. We're going to answer it. It's going to go very small. We're going to answer it. But Purim is bringing out something that is like in our kishkas, like what is going on here? Who created this holiday? How did they create it? And so then, pshita, kulu anshe knesset agdola. It's takino. It's true, the Tanaim could not possibly override a takana of the anshe knesset agdola, so don't worry, it was the anshe knesset agdola that came up with the 11th to the 15th. But the question lingers. Heiche Remiza, where's the remez? Where's the proof? Amar Rav Shemen bar Abba, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Amar Kra, L'kayem et yemei hapurim ha'ela bizmanehem, zmanehem arbei tiknu lahem. Again, it's a classic Gemara answer. The word is zmanehem in plural, and that gives me multiple possibilities beyond the 14th and 15th. Right? Again, it's a drush, but it gets me to the spread of the 11th to the 15th. Anshe Knesset Hagdola. Okay, we're not done with this, and when we get to the Yerushalmi, of course it could. Yes. But remember, they're looking to smooth over all the rough edges. There are so many rough edges. Let's take a look at the next question. The next question is about Yoshua ben Nun, and then I'm going to let the Yerushalmi hopefully really reinforce the point I'm making. Well, our Mishnah obviously cannot be like this Tana. Detanya Rabbi Yoshua ben Karcha Omer, Krachin hamukafin choma miyimot Achashverosh korim b'chamishasar. Okay, Yoshua ben Karcha says that the mukafot choma goes back to who? If we had to take a vote here, the Tana of the Mishnah or Yoshua ben Karcha, who makes more sense? Yoshua ben Karcha. He's reading the Megillah. He's like, I know what happened in Shushan. The story is in Shushan. So it makes sense, walled cities from the time of Shushan. This isn't me, right? This is Yoshua ben Karcha, who says if we look for walled cities from the time of Achashverosh. And the Gemara comes in and says, well, our Mishnah obviously doesn't align with Yoshua ben Karcha, right? Because Yoshua ben Karcha, my Talmud Rabbi Yoshua ben Karcha. Well, what's the reason? It's going to be pretty straightforward. Ki Shushan, because we're talking about Shushan. Ma Shushan mukefet choma mimot Achashverosh v'korem b'chamisha Af kol shemukefet choma mimot Achashverosh korem b'chamisha Yoshua ben Karcha says something very straightforward. The story takes place in Shushan. Those are the ones that celebrate on the 15th because they continued fighting. And so all walled cities that are mukefet choma from the time of Shushan should be the ones to celebrate on the 15th. That's his reason. Makes sense to me, right? I think it makes sense. Now look what the Gemara is going to do to support the Tana of the Mishnah. And then again, we have to read between the lines. There's a reason the Tana goes back to Yoshua. It makes no sense. It's not part of the story. But let's see. Vitana Didan and our Tana, my Tama, Yaliv Prazi Prazi. Ketiv Hacha Al Kain HaYehudim HaPrazim. We're talking about the Yehudim in the unwalled cities. Uktiv hatam levad me'arei haprizi harbe ma'od. Okay, this pasuk's in Devarim, by the way, not in Yehoshua. But, of course, we know Yehoshua is around in the time of Devarim. I'm just showing you there's an enormous jump here, a leap, midrashic leap. But it's going to affect the Tana of our Mishnah. It's going to affect the halacha. Ma lahalan mukefet choma mimot Yoshua ben Nun, avkan mukefet choma mimot Yehoshua ben Nun. So something very interesting happens here, and I'll explain. They find a word, it's not a very common word, right? I think actually prazim appears twice, one in Dvarim and one in Esther. So we'll call it Gzeira Shava. And they say as follows, I'm going to start with Dvarim. I know it's not part of the story, but I'm going to start with Dvarim. It's the earlier text, and also where does it appear? In the 5 books of Moses, in the Torah. Mm-hmm. So if I want to find a pasuk to anchor everything, I'm going back to Dvarim. And Dvarim has the word Prazim. And the Megillah has the word Al Kain HaYehudim HaPrazim. And just like, now this is where there's a jump, who would you have assigned to Prazim in Dvarim? Would you have assigned Yoshua ben Nun? When you think of Dvarim, do you think of anyone think of Yoshua? No. I don't think of Yoshua. Who do you think of? Think of Moshe. It's Moshe's swan song. Right? But again, notice the leap. The Gemara knows that. But they're like, well, Yoshua was around then. And so it must be walled cities from the time of Yoshua. And you're like, really? I mean, Yoshua ben Karcha just seems more convincing, I'm sorry. But what are we doing here? What we're doing, and we're going to see it in the Yerushalmi even more clearly, we're going back to the Torah. Why aren't we going to use Moshe? Why aren't we going to use Moshe? It's Moshe's book. Moshe says the words. Because Moshe doesn't go into the land of Israel. Yoshua goes into the land of Israel. Yoshua takes us into the land of Israel. The description here are towns and cities, unwalled and walled, the whole pasuk, in the land of Eretz Yisrael. What will happen? What we'll encounter? So the Gemara takes a kind of poetic license and says as follows. This is the message, I believe. Yeah, Shushan's going to come and go. This story needs to remain eternal. It's a story of our salvation from near annihilation. Now, it's true, we've had many such moments. And what we do every year is we go back to the Purim story and reflect on those moments. We have to start somewhere. But really, this isn't a story about Shushan, Ahasuerus, Mordecai, and Esther. This is a much earlier story. This is the story of our history, and where are we going to anchor our history? In the land of Israel. And so when you think of Mukafot Choma, don't think of Shushan. Shushan comes and goes. There is no Shushan. But the land that Yoshua brought us into, that's our land forever. And so if we're going to have something that we bring into the way we think about this day, we're bringing the land of Israel into this story. And this is how we're doing it. And it's by force, if I would say. It doesn't make any sense. Yoshua ben Karcha makes sense. The Tana Didan does not really make sense. But the Gzeira Shava, which is a strong tool of exegesis, allows for this creativity. And now we're with Yoshua ben Nun going into the land of Israel, and we're beginning to think, what are those Mukafot Choma? Essentially, what's left today? There's only one Mukafot Choma that really everyone agrees on. Yerushalayim. It's Yerushalayim. Yerushalayim remains the standard for Mukafot Choma. It's very powerful. Shushan. I read Rav Melamed. I'm not sure, but I think they do. But I think there's a machloket. There's a machloket. Machloket. The only one that everyone agrees on is Yerushalayim. I was reading some of Rav Melamed. Right? It's not the one that everyone agrees on is Yerushalayim. It could be some of them do it, and some of them do 2 days. A lot of places that are Suffolk do 2 days.
Why do they talk about
Hebron. Yeah.
Is there something problematic in doing a gzera between a Torah source and a non-Torah source? It's unusual. First of all, remember the Gemara already. This is a stam piece, right? It's a later in terms of the editing of the Gemara, and the Mishnah exists, right? The Mishnah is a very authoritative source. What they're trying to get at is why and how did the Mishnah go back, and they come up with the Gezerah Shava. So it's unusual, but it's not unthought of, right? We're going to see in a moment they're going to be using. The Gezerah Shava is only valid if it's something that's received by tradition going right back to worship.
Yeah. We're about to get, so the Yerushalmi is going to answer you. I'm just showing you that the creative attempts they're making to ground this holiday. This holiday maybe shouldn't exist, but it exists. Okay, let's take a look at the Yerushalmi. It's going to be even clearer, guys. Rabbi Yishmael bar Nachman b'shem Rabbi Yonatan, shmonim v'chamisha skedim. There are 85 elders. Umehem shloshim v'kama neviim. There are 30 prophets. They're all sitting around. Hayum mitzta'arin al hadavar hazeh. They are upset about Purim. How did this happen? How is this holiday legitimate? Let's see. Amru k'tiv, what does it say in Vayikra? Eila hamitzvot asher tziva Adonai et Moshe. Elu hamitzvot shenitztavenu mipi Moshe. V'kach amar lanu Moshe, ein navi acher atid l'chadesh lachem davar me'ata. Mordechai ve'Esther mivakshim l'chadesh lanu davar. 85 elders, 30 prophets cannot figure out why this holiday with 4 mitzvot is not some sort of overriding or expanding on the Torah of Moshe. Right? A little bit like you were saying, like we're doing a Gzeira Shava from Esther to Devarim. Devarim, that's the word of God. That's sanctity. But how are we creating a connection? And the Yerushalmi says it, they're sitting around. Now look what happens. Lo zazu misham nosin v'notnim b'davar ad sheheir HaKadosh Baruch Hu et eineihem umatzu ota ktuva b'Torah u'v'neviim u'ktuvim. We're going to get to this in a moment. HaKadosh Baruch Hu has to be Me'ir Lahem Einayim. Now, why is that an important part? God does not appear in the Megillah. It's one of the biggest problems with the Megillah. I know, Hester Panai, Hester Panim, God is there. We have to look for God even when He isn't present. We do wonderful. I mean, Hasidus loves Purim, the Kabbalah, the Zohar. Everyone loves Purim once it's established. What the Gemara is taking us back to is the earliest discussions of why are we doing this? Where is God? And do Mordechai and Esther have the audacity? Who are they? Two Jews. Does anyone have the audacity? 85 elders, 30 prophets. The Yerushalmi does not pull its punches. It's like right there. Ad shehi ira kadosh baruch hu. They need some sort of divine inspiration. They can't get there. And then you know where they're going to find the answer? In the Torah itself. Let's see. It's amazing. So finally they go back. Hadahi dichtiv yomer Adonai al Moshe ktov zot zikaron b'sefer zot Torah. Kama detemar v'zot haTorah. So they go to the parsha of Amalek, the one we read v'yavo Amalek on Shabbat. We're going to read it tomorrow. Well, you're going to read it on Shabbat. I'm going to read it tomorrow. And ktov zot zikaron b'sefer. So God's me'ir lahem einayim. So they're not doing a gzeira shava now. They're digging into the language of the Torah. Ktov zot zikaron b'sefer, and zot Torah is going to asher sam Moshe. On the page. Moshe lifnei b'nei Yisrael. And so basically what we're saying is that it's going to be okay because in Esther it says, Esther kiyam et divrei hapurim ha'ela v'nichtav b'sefer. We're doing another Gezerah Shava, but Ktov zot zikaron b'sefer, zikaron b'sefer becomes a way to say that Moshe was already alluding to an ot zikaron b'sefer about Amalek that was somewhere in the future, right? He'ir lahem einayim. They go back to the Torah itself and they find an answer in the pasuk, and they say this too is a zikaron b'sefer, specifically about Amalek, and this is just an extension of what Moshe told us to do. That's how far they have to go. He'ir lahem einayim. They need God to the he'ir lahem einayim because they're not quite sure this is legitimate, right? Let's take a look at, we're going to look a little bit further at this conversation does not end. Okay, we're going into the Megillah on Zion, but in the Bavli, but it continues on Yud Tet as well. Throughout the tractate, they keep coming back to, wait, remind me why we're doing this? Remind me why this is a holy day? Oh, right, Ktov zot zikaron b'sefer. That becomes like a clarion call. Karot HaMegillah ba'adar rishon v'nitabra hashana. Just see what time it is. Okay, I'm good for it. V'nitabra hashana korinota ba'adar sheni. Ein ben adar harishon la'adar hasheni ela kriyat HaMegillah u'matanot le'evyonim. Okay. So one of the things obviously Chazal are able to do is Ibur Hashana, Ibur HaChodesh, where they add a month. And where do we add it? We add it in Adar. Okay. And so what we find out is Ein Bain, it's midway through Adar. Why might they add the second Adar like after Purim? Why might it happen? It doesn't happen really anymore, but
it's too wet.
It's too wet, it's too cold.
It's not spring yet. The crops haven't.
Exactly. Beautiful, right? Very important because also even in terms of the Omer and the Lahashrish Tatua, we needed to reflect a certain cycle in terms of the crops and the weather. And so after Purim, on the 16th of Adar, they look around and they say, you know what? This is not where we're supposed to be. And we're adding a month. Now, we've already celebrated Purim. So the question is, what do we do in Adar Sheni? And I love the Ein Bain, which is no big deal. You just read the Megillah again and give Matanot Le'evyonim. It doesn't seem like you do the Su'udah Mishlach Manot again, but you have to read the Megillah again. Ein Bain, Adar Rishon, Adar Sheni. So I'm just showing us where we're situated in the Gemara. Before we get into this piece of Gemara, which I think is a fascinating piece, we need to talk about Litameat Hayadayim. What does it mean for books to cause the hands to be impure? All 24 books of the Bible have the status of sacred scrolls and render the hands impure. But 4 of the 5 Megillot were under debate as to whether they should have sacred status. The only exception is Echa. Very interesting. Echa was unanimously, it's a very sad book, and there's nothing to really discuss. The traditional explanation, what does it mean, l'tamei et hayadayim? It's a bit strange and convoluted. It goes like this. People used to store their truma near the same place they stored their holy scrolls. Why would they do that? Holy food, holy scrolls. We'll put them all in a cabinet together, and that's holy. But the problem is the mice. Right. The sages issued a decree that sacred scrolls shall render hands impure. So that would mean if you touched the scroll and then touched the truma, you would render the truma tameh. A second degree, but it would still be tameh. This was trying to encourage greater regard for the scrolls, by otherwise you're putting them with food and then the vermin come and gnaw and ruin them. So the idea is, notice the logic. If you're going to disqualify the truma, people are going to move the scrolls somewhere else. They don't want to lose the truma. So we protect the scrolls by essentially saying the food will become corrupted. You won't be able to eat the food. Oh, that's not good. Okay, let's move the scrolls. Recently, academic scholars have explained that according to some laws in the Torah, holiness can rub off on an item with which it has contact. The rubbing off on the item works a little bit like impurity, except the terminology is not that the item becomes impure, rather it becomes holy. The rabbis inherited the concept that the scrolls of Scripture were so holy that anything they touched would become holy as well. But they didn't have language. I think this is Joshua Berman who says this. They used the normal term for rubbing off, l'tamei et hayadayim. What really seems to happen is the hands become holier. So again, that always bothered me, that somehow our hands become tameh from touching the scrolls. So the suggestion is they were using language of tumah, but they really meant the opposite, but they didn't have a way. Okay, something to think about. Washing the hands with a specific amount of water cleanses them. That's all you have to do. It's very straightforward, tumah. Okay, turn the page. Now we're in the Gemara. Let's get going. Amar of Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Anyone have a question? I've kind of built a comment question. You've been good. Please, your participation, I appreciate it. Amar of Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Esther eina mitama et hayadayim. Here we go. Esther does not defile the hands, which means Esther is not a holy book. Lamemra desavar Shmuel Esther lav beruach hakodesh ne'emra. Which, by the way, is also a bit of what? I don't remember seeing Ruach HaKodesh in the Megilla, but this is becoming part of the narrative. V'ha'amar Shmuel Esther Ruach HaKodesh ne'amra. Ne'amra likrot v'lo ne'amra lichtov. Maybe. Okay, so what we're going to say is, there's a quote, Rabbi Yehuda is the faithful student of Shmuel. He quotes him very, very often, probably more often than you hear Amar Shmuel. You have Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Shmuel. And Rabbi Yehuda comes along in the name of Shmuel and says, Esther eina mitama et hayadayim. And then the Gemara has to say, well, does Shmuel not think it's a holy book? He doesn't think there was Ruach HaKodesh. So Shmuel says, well, Esther was said with Ruach HaKodesh. We know that's what Shmuel says. Well, to read it, but not to write it. Okay, I'm not sure how to explain that, but yes, reading it is holy, but not writing. Meitvei. Rabbi Meir Omer, Kohelet eino mitamei et hayadayim, umachloket b'shir hashirim. I just wanted you to see some of the back discussions. Rabbi Yassi Omer, Shir Hashirim mitamei et hayadayim, umachloket b'Kohelet. Okay, so which of these books is mitamei et hayadayim? Rabbi Shimon Omer, Kohelet mikule beit Shammai mechumrei beit Hillel, aval Rut v'shir hashirim ve'Esther mitamei et hayadayim. So we basically say, well, there's a machloket around Kohelet between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. Beit Hillel says mitamei, Beit Shammai says they know mitamei, but everyone agrees about Ruth, Shir Hashirim, and Esther. Okay. Huda Amar Rabbi Yoshua, Tanya Rabbi Shimon ben Menashe Omer, Kohelet eino mitamei et hayadayim, mibnei shel chochmato shel Shlomo. It's only the wisdom of Shlomo. Why would it be holy? Right? Like, these are the questions, right? Very interesting. 2,000 years ago, which of these books are holy? They're all part of the Tanakh. What do we do? Okay. Tanya Rabbi Eliezer Omer. Now, I'm bringing us back to Esther. There's a little bit of a digression around Shmuel and his wisdom and who gave Shmuel the wisdom, and that's Ruach HaKodesh. I just wanted you to see the things we take for granted are still being worked out in the Talmud. Right? We take it for granted. They know, by the way, that we're reading Shir Hashirim, and they know that we're reading Kohelet. They know that. It's already a done fact. What they're examining, because they can, is why these don't seem like the holiest of books. Shir Hashirim. Right? Even Ruth, it's a nice book. Why do we read it? It's lovely. What do we take it? So we get to David at the end? That's why we read the whole book? So Esther doesn't have God's name in it. Why are we reading it? So you see real questions about some of the scriptures that for 2,000 years have been interpreted and meaning has been assigned to because we've been reading it for 2,000 years. But the rabbis take us back to a much earlier stage. I mean, these are Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yossi, they're Tanaim, and they're basically saying, but why are we doing this?
But wasn't this a time when they were finishing the canon?
So I believe the canon actually historically had already been done. We're in 200 CE. So, but it is as if they're considering the canon. I agree. They're having a conversation as if they could still really remove some of these books. You're right. They're having a conversation. They would have been able to. They would have been able to. If Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Meir had decided Shira Shirim's out, then it would have been out. But basically, Second Temple period is where we have these. We have the canon. So this will be a little later. But they're acting as if they're considering, and they're like everything. But okay. Now we're going to get to, this is a really fantastic conversation. Remember we said earlier, Shmuel and Rav Yehuda, of course, are Amoraim. Everyone else that we've been quoting are Tanaim. So just notice the seamless integration of basically 150-year spread of Shmuel and Rav Yehuda could not be in conversation with Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yossi, but the way it's being presented, it's very, very seamless. The movement from one person to another. Now we're going back. Because remember, Shmuel said, Esther Baruch HaKodesh Namra. And now we have 4 Tanaim, who are going to talk about where the Ruach HaKodesh is. You need to look for it. Tanya, Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Esther Baruch HaKodesh Namra, Shene'amar v'yomar Haman b'libo. That Haman said in his heart. How could she have known what was in his heart if she didn't have Ruach HaKodesh? We're actually going to dismiss quite a bit of this, but what does that mean? And she had telepathy. She had some sort of mental telepathy with Haman, which shows that Ruach HaKodesh. She knew what he was saying in his heart. Rabbi Akiva Omer, Esther Baruch HaKodesh Ne'amra, Shene'amar v'tihi Esther noseit chen b'nei kol ro'ah. Well, how could Esther have known that? Like again, Ruach HaKodesh, that everyone responded to her. So that shows Ruach HaKodesh. Rabbi Meir Omer, Esther Baruch HaKodesh Ne'amra, Shene'amar v'yivada hadavar l'Mordechai. That the matter became known to Mordechai. So there's no one's in agreement here. Where's the Ruach HaKodesh in the story? Each of us can find it somewhere else. Rabbi Yossi ben Dormeskid Omer, Esther Baruch HaKodesh Ne'amra, uvabiza lo shelchu et yadam. How could they have known that no one took any of the spoils when they wrote down the story without Ruach HaKodesh? And Shmuel then says, I have hatam, have amina milta da'adife mikulo. Shmuel is not one for over humility. And he says, if I had been there, my approach would have won. Like my milta was adifa. Like what I'm suggesting is better than all of you. Kimu v'kiblu, kimu lamala mashi kiblu lamata. Now this is very interesting because he basically says, once we start doing it, God gives his stamp of approval. Kimu lamala mashi kiblu lamata. Right? We accepted it. Lo b'shamayim hi. It's the Lo b'shamayim hi story playing out here, that God sits and laughs when, nitzchuni banai, my sons have defeated me. Right? This idea that Shmuel says, I'm in Bavel, circa 300 CE, 270 CE, something around that. And I'm looking around and everyone's keeping Purim. And they're reading the Megilla, and they're giving gifts to the poor, and they're doing Mishloach Manot, and they're drinking. Maybe, Rava comes after Shmuel, so maybe not drinking so much yet. And they're celebrating this holiday as a sign of God's salvation. Kimu lamala, masha kiblu lamata. That's what Shmuel says, but we're not quite done. Amar Rava, what?
Isn't that a lot of the time in the Gemara it says puk chazi?
Yes, it's a puk. Absolutely, it's a little puk chazi with lo b'shamayim hi. Go out and see what people are doing, and if it's l'shem shamayim, kimu lamala. Right, but yeah, Rivka.
There are communities around the world that since the Middle Ages, when they were pogroms or situations like what went on in Shushan, they celebrate even today. They remember the date each year and they do things.
Right.
Just that community. So there are communities.
Right. It becomes a minhag for that community. Absolutely. The day of celebration, a little bit like Megillat Ta'anit, where none of the dates really survive except Hanukkah and Purim. But those were all days where they were saved by from the Rome, where they defeated the Greeks or the Romans, and and there was no fasting and no eulogizing, and that was like a mini celebration, a mini holiday. So it doesn't surprise me if a community has survived. I can understand a community saying we have a day of salvation that our community recognizes. It's very lovely. Okay, Amar Rava. L'kulu itlahu percha levad midishmol deleit le percha. So Rava, I skipped some of the discussion, but Rava then says, I can refute all of them. In other words, Vayomer Haman alivo. I mean, it doesn't take a lot to guess what the guy was thinking. He was second in command. He comes in to see the king. That didn't require Ruach HaKodesh, says Rava. Like, come on. And that Esther nosef chen beinei kol ro'eh. That's not Ruach HaKodesh. Like, that, again, like, you're writing a book. You want it to be a little literary. You add that. Of course, people responded to her. And the idea of V'yivada davar leMordechai, well, Mordechai knew the language. Like, why is that? Like, he didn't need to have it be known to him. And the last one, Uvabizalo shalchu et yadam, well, messengers came and reported. No one took the booty. No one took the loot. So none of those are Ruach HaKodesh moments. Like, come on. That's just part of how you write a story. And so, but Shmuel, kimu lamala masha kiblu lamata, there's no refutation for that. And then after all of that is laid down, the sugya ends with Rav Yosef and Rav Nachman, which again really reinforces what we've been talking about and Shmuel's point. Rav Yosef says, V'mei Purim ha'ela lo yavru mitoch ha'Yehudim. Rav Nachman said, V'zichram lo yasuf mizaram. Basically, if we continue keeping Purim, then that is where the Ruach HaKodesh is. In other words, the idea of V'mei Purim ha'ela lo yavru mitoch ha'Yehudim, well, go out and see, are the Jews still doing it or not? If they're still doing it, then that's the Ruach HaKodesh. Also, V'zichram lo yasuf mizaram, children and grandchildren, great-grandchildren, great-great-great, we're still celebrating Purim. So obviously that is where the Ruach HaKodesh, if it succeeds in continuing on for generations, then we have succeeded. So we're going to take a look next at a different sugya. I'm just going to close this and we'll do a little bit of something else. But it seems to me that this is a holiday that needed to exist. It's, as I said, more of a yesh me'ayin than probably any other holiday that we have, than any other holiday. Things about it are a little askew. They don't align with the kedusha of other holidays that are kind of built in, right? The metaphors, the meaning and so on have a comedic element. There's laughter, even though we're celebrating, of course, our salvation and near annihilation, but it's an essential story. It's an essential story for us to return to year after year. And I would say certainly, right, until a year and a half ago, I would say I had come to a point where I would hear Imesh Kachech at weddings, and I'd be a little bit like, why are we still singing this? Like, we're here. We're in Jerusalem. What is the point? And I think October 7th shattered the sense of complacency. We're looking around the world and we're recognizing how easy it is to go from sitting lavetach to suddenly recognizing that we are actually very, very vulnerable. And so Purim has to be a holiday in our cycle. It's brilliant that it's right before Pesach, right? The idea that we go from Purim to Pesach, the salvation, the near annihilation, the survival in the aftermath of what starts on Pesach. Pesach is the beginning of our story. Where we were chosen, we were taken out of Egypt. That's the beginning. We end the year with Purim. Right, and then we go into Pesach. The placement is also really meaningful. What I want to look at next, in the little time I have, in the 20 minutes I have or so, is some of particularly one of the mitzvah of Mishloach Manot, and I also want to talk about manuscripts. And so we're going to part two. And I'm closing part one. That was part one, but I want to talk about the Mishloach Manot, because that too is like nothing else we have throughout the year. I mean, throughout the year we have Su'udot. We know what a Suda mitzvah is. We have Matanot L'Avyonim. We also have Kriyat Torah. We have other Kriyat Megilla. We know what to do with those. Those have familiarity, even as each one has its own characteristics. What we don't have is Mishloach Manot Ish L'Rei Ehu. And so I will say this is a little bit like what you read about around Christmas, where people begin to struggle with gift giving and gift receiving, right? It actually, while many of us, some of you will absolutely respond as I begin to talk about this. Some of you will say, oh, I never thought about that. Thank God, never happened to me. But giving gifts to friends is, as a mitzvah, is probably one of the most complicated mitzvot we have all year. And we're going to see that the rabbis of the Talmud themselves fall into this situation where they're not always pleased with what they're giving or what they're receiving. That there's a sense of, really, that's all you think of me? That's it? This is your mitzvah. You have to give one mishloach manot. Ish l'reyehu. And this is it? I understand you're giving 60, but why do I have to be shortchanged because you decided to give 60? It's one. The mitzvah is one. So each one should be as if you're only giving one. But in reality, it doesn't work that way. Do you want to comment on something?
Yeah, the other one is Pesach. They let everyone come and eat.
Halach ma'anya. Yes, that's true. Well, who are we letting come in and eat? All who are hungry. We know what to do.
Jews. Only Jews. You don't invite going to the mitzvah.
Well, I would say, when do we ever invite Goyim to anything in our year? Right.
Well, it's not an obligation. You have a bar mitzvah, bat mitzvah.
No, for sure. No, I'm not saying it to be funny. I'm just saying in terms of my mitzvah, I have to make sure, I think I gave this share, and I don't know if I gave it here, that the poor non-Jews have tzedakah collectors that collect for their community. I don't have to give to Goyim, but I have to make sure they have charity collectors, and I have to make sure their sick are visited and their dead are buried. That I have to do. But halach ma'anya is really for all who are hungry, come and eat. I'm not actually inviting my friends unless I have friends who don't have food. It's an extension of charity. It's my feeding those who are hungry, right? And so I know what to do with that. It's true. That's unusual for Pesach, that I actively invite in people who have need. The fact that I invite Jews who don't have where to go is an extension. I've built that onto the mitzvah because the reality is I don't usually go around and collect homeless people and bring them into my home for Pesach. I invite friends or students or people, lone soldiers, who are in need of a Pesach Seder. They're not in need of the food. The mitzvah of halach ma'anya is specifically about feeding those who are hungry. We've extended it. I think it's beautiful. But it's hachnasat orchim. We've tacked hachnasat orchim on top of it. So let's take a look at Mishloach Manot, and hopefully I'll be able to show you a few stories. We have this idea, if we look at Megillat Esther, right, we know, Ki amim asher nachu behem hayudim me'ogehem, va'achodesh hazer asher na'apach lehem mi'agon l'simcha u'me'evel l'yom tov, very powerful pasuk, osimo la'asot otam yemei mishteh v'simcha, u'mishloach manot. I'm on page 8, ish l'reyehu u'matanot levyonim. I'm on page 8. I'm just looking at the source from Megillah. I haven't done anything. Nechema then talks about, right, V'yomer Nechemiah hu Tarshish of Ezra Kohen, and he basically says there, the only other place we really have this, and I actually don't know what day I think it's Rosh Hashanah, where he talks about also there, Ichlu, a pasuk that starts after the word HaTorah. V'yomer lehem, L'chu ichlu mishmanim ushtu mimtakim v'shalchu manot, right? So there we also have this idea, go eat choice foods and drink sweet drinks and send portions to whoever has nothing. But
with
even nothing prepared, right? So nothing prepared, sorry, thank you. Mishloach manot ish l'reyehu, nonetheless, I'm just showing an alignment with Nechemiah, which would have been a little bit after the Megillah. It's the only other place we have this idea of sending manot to people in our lives. So let's take a look at the next page 9. If I have time, I'll come back to this, but I just want to show you, this is a page of Talmud manuscript. I think this is, I have to remember where I took this one from. I should have noted. It's not London. It might be Leningrad. But look how messy it is. Right? I'm just showing that, right? Like this is a page of Talmud. This is the source that we're actually looking at, the page that I'm about to read. Look at all the comments on the side and above. You can understand why mistakes get made when Talmud manuscripts are being copied. So this is the story we're about to read. There were a lot of mistakes. And Rashi has a corrupted text, and the Ritva is going to point that out, and I'm going to explain, because the real story is very, very powerful. What I'm going to show you now, it's the bottom of Zion Amid Aleph, and it's going to go into Zion Amid Bet, and we're going to read it as it appears in the Vilna, and as it seems to have appeared to Rashi. Okay? But then I'm going to read to you what the correct text should have been. Umatanot Levyonim. I'm on the top of page 9. Tane Rav Yosef u'mishlach manot ish d'reyehu shtei manot li'ish achad u'matanot levyonim shtei matanot l'shnei b'nei adam. So the mitzvah says as follows: 2 portions to 1 person. Matanot levyonim is 2 gifts to 2 people. I know there began to be, and I believe this was probably day school, you have to give 2 different foods, 2 different brachas. That actually doesn't appear anywhere in the Gemara or the Rishonim. I'm not even sure it appears in the Achronim. My guess is it was a way, if I need Tzvi Ron here, because he wrote a book on Minhagim, I think it's late. It's a late idea, this idea of 2 brachot, and it really might have been part of a day school education. I can imagine it coming out in order so people would understand what 2 portions looked like. You would say 2 brachas, and then then it's clear. But the reality is, if you want to send 2 steaks, ma na'im u'ma nechmad, right? Like that's really nice.
Make mine
So
medium well.
what?
Make mine medium well.
Exactly. Okay, sure. A steak and fish, even, right? Exactly. Certainly beautiful. But I'm being serious. If I wanted to send 2 steaks, that would be 2 manot. That would be a wonderful mishloach manot. Okay. So Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya. So now we get to a story. Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya, Shadar le the Rabbi Yoshaya, Atma de Igla Tilta, Vegarba de Chamra. So Rabbi Yehuda the prince, Rabbi Yehuda is the son of Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. He is the wealthiest man by far in his milieu. He comes from the Gamliel family. He is the Nasi. He's a Talmud scholar. And he sends his colleague, Rabbi Yoshaya, a thigh. It's very large, quite a few steaks, from the thigh of a calf born third to its mother. Even a calf has a considerable thigh, and you're going to get a few steaks out of the thigh, and it's a very good piece of meat. It's the calf born third to its mother. It's not like a chicken pulki. It's serious. And a jug of wine. A good bottle of wine, a very big steak. Okay, the kind that at Norman's, if you could finish, he would give it to you for free. What was that, the kilo steak? So let's assume something along that line, for those who remember Norman. Yes. Shalach le kiyamta banu rabbeinu mishlach manot ish tareho matanot levyonim. So Rabbi Yoshaya sends back a very puzzling message, which is you have fulfilled both mishlach manot and matanot levyonim, which doesn't seem possible, and leads Rashi to say, well, maybe he was trying to say you were so generous, you fulfilled 2 mitzvahs. It doesn't make sense. So now I'm going to read to you the true version of the story. Wait, it goes as follows. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi Shadar le Rabbi Yoshaya Itma de Igla Tilta V'Garba de Chamre. He sends back Shalach le Kiyamta Banu Rabbeinu Umatanot La'evyonim. He sends him back. I'm reading from the manuscript. You can follow in the English or just listen. It's better to listen, actually. Rabbi Yoshaya says, thanks for the charity. That, as my sister Miriam would say, is a shtoch. Like, that is like a jab. That is like, yeah, I'm not really like, what is that? That's all you had? That's what I was worth to you? A steak and a bottle of wine? You're the richest man in town. Like, I don't know, I thought I deserved a little more. Hadar shalach kula igla tilta. Right, it's actually very clear in this manuscript. He sent him back an entire calf, born third to its mother. Vitilta garbe techamra. 3 jugs of wine. Shalach le kiyamta banu rabbeinu u'mishlach manot ish l'reyehu. Now you got it right. We start off with a story. It's so complex. Gift giving, for all of us who have ever gotten a really good gift, it's the best feeling in the world. Why? Because you feel like someone really saw you. It doesn't have to be an expensive gift, but it's a gift that really says, I see you, I know you, I got something that's about you. Right? Mm-hmm. The worst gifts are if someone shows up and brings like a bottle of perfume to someone who never wears perfume or body cream or whatever. Again, nothing wrong with those gifts if you know someone likes those. But the perfunctory, here I'm bringing this, bottle of wine's always good. But we've all gotten bad gifts. And we know what bad gifts are like, right? And so we start off, Mishlach Manot, we're going to see 2 more stories. I'm going to skip the Ritva in a moment. Rabbi Oshaya is not happy with his Mishlach Manot, which, by the way, would be a lovely Mishlach Manot. A big steak and a bottle of wine. Who would complain? But Rabbi Oshaya says, you are the richest man in the country. You can do better. And Rabbi Yehuda accepts the Musar and sends him back a calf and 3 bottles of wine. The Ritva even says that's essentially what happens. And all the manuscripts support this story. Rashi had a corrupted manuscript. Every other manuscript has the story, not every, but the main manuscripts. That's the story. It's a powerful story. Let's take a look at the next two stories just so we can close up. I want to end with the Avin brothers. Rabba Sharilei Lamari Barmar. Rabba, who is the Rosh Beitin, he's the Rosh, the head of the academy in Pumbedita, I believe. And I'm on page 11 now, top of page 11. He sends to Mari Barmar Biyad Abaye. Now Abaye is his young nephew. Abaye and Rabba with an Aleph are going to be colleagues. Abaye is the nephew of Rabba. And Abaye's father and mother died. His mother died in childbirth. His father died when she became pregnant. So he's an orphan. He's raised by his mother, nursemaid, who he calls Ima. Amra li Aim, my mother said. He has a beautiful relationship with his nursemaid. And he's also raised in the house of Rabba. So he's the young guy going back and forth with the Mishloach Manot, and he's being sent to Mari Barmar. And he sends Taska de Malay Taska de Kashba Umale Kse Kimcha de Avshuna. He sends a basket of dates and a cup of like cracked sweetened wheat. Kind of like eating popcorn. You don't have to trust me on that. And it's a very simple Mishloach Manot. It's the kind of Mishloach Manot a struggling Torah scholar sends, and if you receive it, you're touched because you recognize that's what he could send. But Rabbah is now the head of the academy, and Rabbah is sending this to his colleague, and it's a little bit like the bonus or the thank you or the gift that the principal sends to his teachers. You need to be really careful about what you're sending, because if you're trying to say thank you or you're trying to say, I appreciate all the work we do together, then sending a basket of dates and a cup of cracked wheat is just not going to cut it. And Abaye, who's the young guy in the story, and the omniscient narrator says, Hashta Amar Mari, Ichaklala Malka Lahave, Dikula Mitzavara Lonachit. He says, if the farmer becomes king, doesn't he take the feed basket off from around his neck? Right? It's a folk saying. But he's basically saying, you can't keep acting like you're a farmer. You're now the head of the academy. That worked well when you were like, a Torah scholar who lived very ascetically and simply. You can do that. But you're now the head of the academy. You're sending gifts to your colleagues as their head. The farmer is no longer a farmer. You have to take the hay out of your hair and the food basket out from around your neck. Mari is not going to be happy. And in fact, Mari is not happy. Hadar Shadarle Ihu Malay Taska de Zangvila Malay Casa de Pilpalata Arifta. He actually sends back a very expensive Mishloach Manot. What he sends back is a basket of ginger and a basket of long peppercorns. It gives us an insight that Babylonia is on the spice route right at this time, but these would not have been inexpensive, but they're sharp. Right? He sends him back giving messages through the Mishloach Manot, and Abaye, as he walks out, says, Hashta Amar Mar, Ana Shtari Lechulya, Viu Shadar Lechorpa. I know Rabbah is going to be upset. He's going to say, I at least sent him something sweet to show that I think he's sweet, to bring sweetness. He's sending me something sharp, something fiery. So Abaye is like, you guys are completely misaligned. And you are not going to be happy, either of you, with what you're receiving. And even the giving of Mari is in response. It's complicated. I love when the Gemara is not smoothing over or sweetening or softening the complexities of our lived experiences. It's giving us permission, maybe, to also acknowledge those feelings, and at the end of the day, try to do your mitzvah as well as you can. What does Abbat Vaya now say? Because it's Masechet Megillah, and it's funny. Amar Abaye, ki nafek mi beimar, hava savana, ki mata lahatam, kervo li shitin sayid shitin mine kdera, va'achle bahu shitin pluge vishula batraita, havu karele tzli kedar, uvay lamikas tza'a batre. So we have what we'll call guzma, extreme exaggeration. He says, when I left the house of Rabba to go to Mari, I thought I was full. I had some dates and some cracked corn or wheat. But when I arrived in Mari, there was like a buffet. 60, it was a shmorg like you can't believe. 60 plates of 60 cooked meats. I tasted everything. I think we've all been there. I once went to a wedding where there were 20 carving stations, like 20, more than 20 stations. And I really did try to hit all of them. Okay. So I ate 60 portions from each of them. The last dish was called pot roast. I was still hungry. I wanted to chew the plate, right? Like, so there's first of all, it's funny, and 60 for those, I don't know if anyone's here in my online class, but in Baba Metzia, Rabbi Elazar ben Rabbi Shimon, the number 60, he has 60 buckets of pus and blood to collect his whatever excretions at night. So it's obviously a gross exaggeration. Gross in Baba Metzia, literally, but here an extreme exaggeration. But he didn't know he was hungry. He was living with Rabbah, and he was like, I thought I was satiated, and I discovered there's a world out there where people actually eat fine food. Like, we eat very meagerly, very, just to sustain ourselves. That's Rabbah. But maybe it explains why Rabbah, when he gets drunk the first time, slaughters Rabbi Zera, because he's not used to drinking. He's not used to that kind of, wine consumption. That's the story we're not going to have time for. So, and then Abaye, I love what he says, Hane damri inche kafinanya v'lo yada. A poor person is hungry and doesn't know it. Remember, he's an orphan. Maybe he also only takes this, who knows, right? I didn't even know I was so poor. I was so orphaned. Inami rav chadav v'sima shchiach. There's always room for dessert. Yes, that's absolutely true. Because after that shmorg, there was a Viennese table. And of course, how could I not try everything at the table? So, yes, that is true. And the last line is just so lovely. The sugya ends like this, and then the Gemara is done with Mishloach Manot forever. Abaye bar Avin, Rabbi Chanina bar Avin, Machalta Su'udatayu la'adate. They get out of the whole thing. They're two brothers. They just exchange su'udas. What a beautiful way to fulfill the mitzvah. I'm not getting involved in the whole Ish L'Re'eu. I'm going to cook a lovely meal. You're going to cook a lovely meal. Neither of us have a lot of means, but we're still going to eat our su'udas mitzvah, and I'll just bring you mine, and you'll bring you yours, and we'll feel that connection through the food we make for one another. So the Rambam actually says, if you don't have means, that's the best thing to do. Because you have to cook the su'uda anyway, and so on. So, the back I have the Rambam. So, may this year, look, as I said, I love when the Gemara gets into our complicated lived experiences. Mishloach Manot should be an opportunity to really, perhaps, nurture, thank, just connect to people in our lives that we love, giving them a little treat, something a little extra. It doesn't have to be extravagant, but being thoughtful can go a long way. Anyway, may it be a blessed Purim. May we have good news. May it be b'simcha. And as I said, if anyone's interested, I know someone here. There you go. Yeah.